Are you satisfied with your understanding of sustainability? If you are not, imagine a journey together, a pluralistic one, with academia, innovators, startups, NGOs, all looking for solutions to the greatest challenge of our time. My name is Samuele Tini, and this is the Sustainability Journey. Welcome to a new episode. Today we are going to discuss innovative model of financing, sustainability, and purpose with somebody who is an expert on digital marketplace, somebody that has worked in bigger companies and now is trying to change the world with purpose. So I'm very pleased to have here today Kevin Kyer. Kevin, it's a pleasure having you today here.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate it.
Our usual question, before going into purpose and understanding what are you trying to do, our audience wants to know, who is Kevin? What is your sustainability journey?
It's kind of interesting looking back. I certainly didn't set out on a path of thinking I'm going to change the world. Quite the opposite. I set out on a path of going into banking. That was like my first job. It was all about, making money, etc. And the sustainability journey, I looking back, I realized actually was a little bit in high school. I would see people, I grew up in the US, and I'd see people throwing trash out their window at intersections. And it made me so angry that I would pick up the trash and go up to the next intersection, come up to their window and give it back to them, which is a little bit crazy. I would never recommend anybody do this. And so I think I always had this idea of taking care of the planet in some way, shape, or form, but I just didn't really find it. The real, sort of sustainable start was working at Yahoo, where I spent 10 years. Corporate social responsibility was just getting started. And the outcome of that was, let's go build the Yahoo Employee Foundation in Switzerland, which is where I'm based. In that process, we said, well, we could do something, that's like a donation, or we could do something, we're Yahoo, let's be innovative. And so the outcome was investing in a renewable energy business that was just getting started in sub-Saharan Africa. And I really knew nothing about off-grid communities, even the environment that much. This is a little over a decade ago, or about solar. But as I got to know the founder and I got to see the impact that these products made, it was mind-blowing. It was, not just reducing carbon emissions. It was, as you know, being where you're based, it really made a difference to people's lives. And there's a business model behind it. Fast forward a number of years and few startups after Yahoo, and I went all in on impact. So there was an accelerator here in Geneva, bright minds, people starting their business with people, planet, and profit in mind. And I've got a finance degree. So I kind of thought that those things weren't supposed to mix. Right. But I learned from these really, really ambitious people. And after doing that for a number of years, it was like, okay, time to roll up my sleeves. But by advising, that's where I learned a great deal about sustainability and all the different models that can exist and mistakes that have been made. And that was kind of like the genesis of creating Pyrpose a few years ago.
I can see similarity more and more after 100 episodes. I can see this. Many people start normal career, let's say, where the business of business is business. And then they realize, of course, that there is something more, there is impact, there's purpose, they want to do more. And this is exactly a story that we have met. And now you are trying to change the world, we can say it boldly, with purpose. So what are the problems that you are trying to address with your startup?
So there's a couple things to address. At a very high level, we are getting capital into energy transition. So you can say that at a very broad level. Okay, that's what does that mean and how does that work? What helps is to get a bit more specific to the market that I'm in, which is Switzerland. So on the energy side of Switzerland, we import about 70% of our energy from abroad. And that's because of fluctuations in waterfalls, winter, summer, etc. Because of that, energy prices have gone up 40 some odd percent since the Ukraine war. So now you've got kind of a cost constraint going on in energy. The next piece is, where do you get scale in terms of energy transition? Well, I think anybody in the climate space knows that big buildings and transport are about 50% of greenhouse gas emissions, right? So we're specifically addressing big buildings in Switzerland that need to green their building. And they particularly need to green their building because the building is old. We have a very aging infrastructure in Switzerland, not the roads, but like the buildings themselves. And these buildings are feeling pressure from insurance providers. They're feeling pressure from investors and, of course, the government. A portion of these buildings are owned by very established, pensions funds, insurance companies, et cetera. They're fine. The other half of these buildings that are owned by individuals who aren't in a position to put up the capital to renovate the building. So maybe they just don't have it, or they've waited too long. So what we're addressing is how do you bring capital to them? So that's one side of it. And the how is really the fun part. The fun part is bringing what should have been or has been historically a financing structure really only accessible to pension funds or insurances or banks, right? Because what this is green infrastructure in Switzerland. What we're doing is allowing what we call a climate conscious investor access to that investment. So before, with any sort of infrastructure, whoever's doing the ownership afterwards will put in, it's like a mortgage, they'll put in 20%, and then the bank will take, 60 to 80%, depending on, very different factors. And so what we're doing is making that accessible so that the climate conscious investor who's sitting here in Switzerland, who feels like I need to do more, maybe I don't feel like these fund structures are really showing me the impact I'm making. And I've got enough capital that, I can drop 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 into this, get better returns, know that I'm supporting the local community. In fact, I can even, walk by the building or in some way, shape, or form, really see what's happening and participate in what really needs to go fast in Switzerland. We're only at about, I think the latest is about 8 or 9% of total energy in Switzerland is solar powered. Switzerland's behind. And so because it's behind, that means there's potential, and we're not the only ones seeing that. Last year, solar installations grew by 40%. That's 2023. Switzerland's a very pragmatic, sort of steady market on all aspects. So for something to grow 40% in 1 year in Switzerland, that's saying a lot. So lots of potential.
And it's very interesting, the model and the work. And I can see there is a huge need, especially for all of Europe, which is an aging building and war. So that is a potential. Can you go a bit deeper on how does it work, also to explain it better? So the investor is maybe a patient capital, somebody that has accepted maybe a lower return to enable that?
So the capital structure can vary. But I'll go back to what I was saying earlier is sort of like a general guideline. So what's going on is there's an independent power provider, right? So it's not the grid, it's an individual. So the individual packages up, well, the entity packages up the entire building renovation, right? So it's going to be solar panels, it's going to be a heat pump. So imagine like a 25 unit apartment complex. So packages all of that up. So again, solar, we'll do heat pump, EV chargers out front, and then some facade and building energy efficiency. So now the independent power provider owns those assets, and they've borrowed a portion from the bank. They've put a portion of it themselves, and then we're reserving a portion for the individual investor. So not the bank, not a pension fund, not the insurance companies. And then what happens is once that goes live, it's producing energy. And that energy is being sold back to the tenants in the building. So they're getting energy at a steady rate that's lower than the market. The excess, so imagine an apartment complex, from the hours of 11 to 4, nobody's there. They're all at their jobs. So that means there's excess being created off of that roof. So that then is sold to the grid. And in Switzerland, it's actually decently attractive. But we just had a measure, and this also shows a bit of where the market's going. We just had a vote 2 weeks ago, public vote, federal level. Switzerland votes a lot, very democratic country. And it passed, and what the measure was about peer-to-peer energy selling. Imagine that same building is now producing that before, and maybe they're monetizing at half the price of the kilowatt hour when they sell to the grid. than what it's being purchased at. With this measure, and of course it's going to take time to implement this. Now with that measure, individuals can buy, the power from that solar energy that's being created in the middle of the day. So imagine maybe a company who's operating during the day in the residential building where there's nobody using it during the day, right? Or they're using it very little. So that's the model. And then because all of that energy is being produced and the money's there, that money then allows you to pay down the investment cost of the building itself, not the building, the renovation that's been done.
And it's very interesting. And it's really something that democratize also the access and work, and also democratize the access to finance. I feel when you were talking, it's really something that say, hey, what I can do, because I know the problems are there, and it also put your money in something, in venture that are really trying to solve the problem, even at your community level, which is really, really important. So it's like, maybe let me use this metaphor, like crowdfunding work, especially to be, and which is the size of the tickets that you can put on projects, and how you can choose, for example, Samuele, or another one that wants to say, hey, I want to contribute to that project because I really like it. How does it work?
Yeah, so it is crowdfunding in the end. And inside crowdfunding, there's a whole bunch of models that have existed over the years, right? There's, like peer-to-peer lending. There's been Kickstarter type things where you're getting a startup off the ground. This is really a very different approach because it's not just crowd-based, right? So if you think about that project I was talking about, there's a bank that's already done all of the due diligence, right? They've structured it. So basically the individual is benefiting from everything that's happened there without having to be a pension fund or have millions and millions. And then the way we've set it up was in terms of cost on our end, and there's all these things that happen in finance in the background that people never see. And so the models have evolved over time. And so I think with ours, yes, it's clearly crowdfunding, it's decentralization, and it's very different because you're seeing something in your community that's been de-risked. But to get more pointed to the question about the entry ticket, the entry ticket is at 1,000 Swiss francs. So this isn't something that really makes sense for someone to, come in for 100. It's not really moving the needle, right? We really want to make sure that this is additive capital and then additive reduction in carbon emissions. So if you're not doing both, then you're just kind of like transferring things around. Like I've seen lots of platforms out there that are bringing capital, but like those folks already had access to that, right? So if like, I don't know, somebody who has a $1 billion family office, hundreds of millions, you're already getting access to deals like this. That's already happening. What we're looking for are those people that are more in a, let's say, sort of mass affluent, right? So they don't have a family office, they don't have a wealth manager, because this is the point. How do we bring that solution to them so that, they could start out at 1,000, see what's happening, understand the scale, et cetera, and then they can start to ratchet up and go, okay, this is getting me a return that's better than leaving it in my savings account. I'm having control over where the capital's going. It's in my community. I'm investing alongside experts, and I'm doing good. Like, really, that's the main point, is we should be able to get a return and do good. There's no reason that those sort of solutions should not be the norm. I think people often think like, oh, if I do good, and we learned this ourselves the hard way by trying different models. I think people often think if you're doing good, then it's a donation or it's an expense. And our thinking is, and again, it's evolved through different models and experiences we've had on the team. If you bring the do good after the return, that's quite the differentiator.
And it's really interesting because you democratize the access to these sort of facilities and funds, which they are a bit difficult for individual and people. So how do you choose the project? This is a question that, how do you choose the projects that also do you collaborate? You also work with individuals? Which is the pipeline where a project can be put on your portfolio?
Yep. So the starting out point was, where was the need? And this kind of, what you end up doing is you start out with this idea of like, okay, let's bring capital to things that reduce carbon emissions. Well, like I said earlier, that's like super broad. Then you start having to look at where's that matchmaking between what the climate conscious investor is looking for, and then like the market dynamics that align up with that, right? And so we looked at a bunch of different models. And what we found was that this energy transition one matches up with what the needs are of that climate conscious investor, right? So first of all, that was the model. So we could have done, I don't know, vertical farming, we could have done biochar funding, we could have done biofuels, and those are all things that could be on the platform one day. But when you start a business, you say, okay, what's the single thing we will solve for that gets you the momentum that then allows you to think about maybe vertical farming does need that capital, right? Building energy transition has been going on for some time, so people understand it. And when you have the banks in there, it's de-risked. So we're solely focused on building energy transition. We don't really want to look at any other solution until all of that sort of flywheel starts moving on its own, and then we can consider other stuff. But for the time being, that's the only thing we'll look at.
Interesting, very interesting. And then can you highlight maybe some project or some impacts that you have done so far that maybe you are proud of?
From a project standpoint, there's about 120 million in the pipeline, and further on down that pipeline, it actually goes up to about 1 billion. So there's a ton that is about to be done. The thing that I'd say we're most proud of is the resilience we've had in building what we're chasing after, right? So I keep saying, money towards reduction in carbon emissions, and we've tried multiple models, and as a startup, you screw up, right? And you try and figure out how quickly you can learn from each one of those mistakes, and that's what's really good. But as we look into the future, it's how do you get 100 million of capital in the next few years onto these energy transition projects, very specifically, like I said, on buildings, because then that'll equate to, if I've done my math right, that's about 2 million metric tons in carbon emissions. That's a rough estimate because it depends on the carbon intensity of every individual building, and so we'll be calculating those as we go along. And I think it's really about how you set everything up for that. So I don't have anything that's happened just yet, because all those projects that we've worked on over the last couple of years, we've had to stop doing them because there was something wrong with the model. Like at one point we were using Web3, and man, if Web3 and climate finance get together one day, which is what we started with, there's incredible opportunity. But unfortunately, those two sides aren't talking to each other. We were doing solutions, as I was talking about earlier today, with sub-Saharan Africa.
Hmm?
And man, that was really hard. It was really hard to sell. It was really hard to scale.
Yeah.
It was really a difficult education process for, again, this climate conscious investor profile. So I think working through each one of those models, learning from them, that's what I'm proud of in terms of what we've done, and that we've stayed true to our core, and that we're finalizing a number of things that we set out to do this year, which was get the legal, because when you're handling people's money,
Yeah.
you need to have a regulatory setup, right? We got that in place. Getting the platform to work in a way that aligns to the values and needs of the climate conscious investor.
Mm.
And then the last piece was just getting that deal flow in place. So right now you can go on the platform, you can sign up, you can register to do everything, and we're in the background finalizing all the structuring stuff. And then you'll be able to go on, you, me, anybody else, and see exactly what I've been talking about.
Fantastic. And this is something interesting. And it's also good to see the process of the startups. You really given us a one-on-one, and we tried this model, we tried the other, and really how to craft that. And a subsequent question to that is like, where do you want to take Pyrpose? Which are the milestone that you want to reach maybe in the next 2-3 years? And then maybe we can do another podcast in 2-3 years to see your impacts.
So we've set out the goals. I touched on them a little bit earlier. So 100 million mobilized in the next 2 years. 2 million metric tons. And we're still sort of working through like how many users does that equate to because of ticket sizes, average ticket sizes, et cetera. But as a ballpark, if we had, and it sounds small, but if we had 20,000 users in the next 2 years, that would absolutely be a great figure to have accomplished. That doesn't mean, 20,000 users are all going to do 5,000, because the 100 million, you got to remember the 100 million, a portion of that's coming from the bank, right? And then as we think about that too, the other thing that would be a great metric, and we'll need to figure out how we track this, but that is just the overall general adoption of green energy in Switzerland. So by the very nature of what we're doing, if your neighbor tells you, hey, I invested in the building energy transformation of that building over there, you're going to go, no, you didn't. No, I did. Look, I'll show you right here. And here's what I put in, and here's the money, and here's how much, reduction in carbon emissions. And this is what it's doing for the building owner and the tenants, and, helping Switzerland to get off of fossil fuels. That's going to create, people having interest in it, and a bit of okay, and then maybe the building owner who's seeing the work being done next door to the one that hasn't had it done goes, you know what, I should probably do that too, right? And so we'll be tracking that. There's another one, and that is when we've prototyped over the last few years, it's really interesting. I'm not a huge let's say like social media person where I go and I share something on a daily basis, right? Maybe once a week or so, I say something on LinkedIn, but I'm not the norm, right? A lot of people are very, very active. And so when we showed our prototypes over the last year to people, we asked them a very simple question, like how would you talk about this with your friends and family? And they'd say, well, I would, and I would want to share it on social media. I'd want to give them a referral that shows, hey, you can do this, and follow my impact, etc. So that's another one where we saw incredible feedback, which I actually found it to be kind of strange because it's personal finance, right? Like you go and make an investment today on, some platform, it's going to be kind of weird for you to go out on LinkedIn and go, hey, I made this great investment in this stock, look at me. But what if you said, hey, I'm making an investment and it's doing good for the planet and it's in my community, check this out. That's kind of interesting because not a lot of people get to do that, right? So we really want to look at, top line, money gone in that's additive and new. We want users that are additive and new, right? And then the combination of those two things should allow the broader growth of more building owners doing it, more users coming in, and it starts to, sort of feed on itself, so to speak, right?
And it's very interesting because, of course, you can create momentum from the small group at the beginning, the 20,000, then it can be something that really get an acceleration and transform also. It has also an impact on the country and the decarbonization and even the well-being of people, which they will have better energy, even support, as you said, the typical project, putting chargers and what. So it will help a lot. Also the transformation of the building, which we know that in Europe, we have an aging structure of building, which needs capital to be put at standard with the challenges of our planet. So it's a really interesting one. I want to ask, then we can we are almost, but just a question out of curiosity. It will be bound only to Switzerland, or you will maybe explore other areas, and also for the people, maybe if they are thinking to see, they need to be based in Switzerland, or it can be also open to people from Europe or other areas.
Short answer, definitely Switzerland is not the stopping point, but it's a unique market that's quite behind, which I was talking about earlier. So there's more than enough deal flow and pipeline of these projects in Switzerland to go for the next several years. But we have already had a few conversations outside of Switzerland, some of them in Europe, some of them over in the Americas, where folks are looking at this broader model. And it really comes down to those local market dynamics. Like the market's great here in Switzerland because it's so early. Other parts of the world, it's super mature and has already sort of taken off. So there's not a lot of potential there. I think globally, solar adoption, and you got to remember, like, heat pumps don't work in all environments and all altitudes, right? So you really got to sort of look at where the opportunity is in those market dynamics. And my business partner is the expert on that. So I'm more on the how do we package all this for the digital, climate conscious investor, and he's got decades of doing projects like this, knowing the broader market. Second part of your question is from a retail investor standpoint, for the most part, it's globally accessible. So you can come in from any part of the world, access it, and you're, for the next few years, investing specifically in the Swiss markets, building energy transformation. There are markets that obviously nobody will work with, and those are global markets that have sanctions, right? So unfortunately, that's just the nature of finance. I think that answered your question, right? For two sides, yeah.
Fantastic. No, it's really interesting, and it's something that can be replicated. It's a model that if can be a case study for supporting green building even in other areas. We did a green building episodes in the past, so it's something that shows the importance, on that part, especially for the needs of a growing planet where building will be. So we say in Africa, especially, the houses for the next generation, they're not even yet been built. So we need to build it sustainably. And going to an end, from your broad experience and your really also entrepreneurial skill set, what are maybe, which is the role that you can see of this model of finance can achieve in sustainability in the future? And which advice also you can give to our audience that is listening to us?
I've spent my career after banking in startups, or I should say not specifically startups, but like digital marketplaces. So I was at Yahoo for 10 years. Pyrpose is my fifth startup. So I have been at a lot of startups. So I think the role is definitely how, like, finance is the catalyst for, good ideas to get going quick, right? There's no business out there that doesn't need the initial catalyst capital to get things off the ground, whether you're a startup or a super big company that exists today. They've always had that, right? So then you talk more specifically about decentralization and what the role is for sort of like the public individuals. And I go to a decent amount of climate events, and no matter who's on stage, not just me, everyone always talks about we need the public involved, right? We cannot just rely on governments. We cannot just rely on institutions, policy, regulation. All those things should exist, do exist, and they make a big difference. And I think there's clearly a need. The question comes down to making sure that it's something that, I come back to what I said earlier, which is truly additive. A lot of times you will see, and I see this all the time, funds that have been, structured to do this, that, and the other, and then I'll go and I'll download the holdings because it's publicly available, right? So these are like public companies. And I'm really struggling to figure out how it's fitting any sort of thesis. It's been packaged as this ESG something or other. And it's really good that those things have kicked off, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, but they're not transparent. So I think what needs to happen is a lot more of these very direct, I know my capital is doing exactly this, and it's aligned to my values, and it's accessible, and it's decentralized. And I've spent my career disintermediating, right? Sitting, and that's really, it's what the internet has created. It's allowed us to be connected to things that we weren't previously connected to, didn't have access to, didn't know the information. So I think it's only getting started, and I'm not alone in my thinking. Like, plug and play references green fintech as like the #1 mega trend this year. There's an association in Switzerland called Swiss Market Lending Association. And again, they're referencing sort of green finance as, the big trend that's going to be going on for the next few years. Going to your second part of the question, the advice inside green finance, maybe you want to do that?
Definitely, yes. So for people that they want to do more and then also learn or behavior. So from your experience and wisdom.
I'm not old enough to have wisdom yet. I'm constantly learning. Hopefully, I never stop. If you're, I guess I would stick to the audience of people that are trying to figure out what their role is in the next few years in terms of being more sustainable. And I think you just have to figure out, okay, is this something I want to go into full time as a job? And going back to what I was saying earlier about what are the needs, and then what are the market dynamics that support those needs, and can you create a business with it? If you care about sustainability, you need to build up expertise in a specific area. I literally get once a month people that are like me that didn't start out in sustainability or climate, and they're saying like, man, it's really great. I make the money I make and it's provided a great lifestyle, but I'd like to have some value. I'd like to have some contribution that is above and beyond just providing for my family. But you need to find something you're passionate about so that every time you get into a conversation, you keep learning and you keep digging into it. You can't just go, I want to have purpose. That's a good starting point. But you got to go real deep on an area. Like I know some folks that are super big on, plant-based protein. I don't have a passion for that, and there's nothing wrong with that. And we all need to find like what that little space is. Then you got to figure out, is this just something you're chasing, or is there a market need out there that's matching your passion? And you're going to need to take some time. I heard a guy say this a few weeks back, and it really resonated with me. An entrepreneur here in Switzerland in sustainability. He said, running a startup is hard. Running a startup and sustainability is even harder, right? So you must have that determination, that passion of, I'm going to chase this down until I get it figured out. And then you need to make sure that you've got some capital backers and an ecosystem around you that has that same vision, and you guys are very aligned on it, because then the capital will flow, then the partners will flow. But you must be prepared that, if you are trying to achieve some good with a startup, it's I think harder than, I don't know, maybe creating the next TikTok or something, like it's a very difficult thing to do. But if you stay true to, what you're chasing after, you'll attract the right people. You just got to be resilient. I think every startup is hard. I'm not trying to say mine is harder than yours, it's more like it's a difficult path, but incredible outcomes when it all comes together.
And it's really an interesting lesson for people, a lot of food for thought. And also I have learned a lot about an opportunity and businesses that can be created in the transition, in the need, without in areas that we are often overlooked. We all think about the shiny things and there, but those are the ones that really can help, and also where you can put your money into purpose and support. So I really want to thank you so much, Kevin, for the episode. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure maybe in 1 or 2 years we'll try to book another episode to see where you have reached in your journey.
Absolutely. I'll remember my numbers, because those are the numbers I use with everybody. And I'll be happy to share our success and our journey that we've gone through to get there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
All right.
Are you satisfied after this wonderful episode? Let's continue together our sustainability journey.